Hey y'all, welcome back to Black Ass Our History Presents. We are in the final portion of this unit for y'all late to the revolution. So, this is the last part of chapter 4, Waxing Poetics, Melanin Prophetic, the Black Arts Movement. Can you dig it? Now, I will give this disclaimer because there's going to be some content, images, and/or language that you're about to experience that may be offensive and may lead to triggers. Viewer discretion is advised. Black Ass Our History is committed and dedicated to educating its audiences on a diaspora of melanated people with the intent to provide an honest and holistic history of our narratives. We are committed to ensuring our history and stories are not filtered through white supremacy indoctrination, dogma, and pseudo social science. This is probably going to be a very lengthy lecture, so I just want to go ahead and provide that disclaimer as well. So let's talk about the visual art of the Black Arts Movement. Can you dig it? To give a little premise too of what we've seen throughout, we're going to see art shift from figurative to non-figurative. So in the 1940s, an American style of art would emerge, and this would actually have a global impact. Abstract expressionism, also known as action painting, involved the movement and engagement of the strokes and markings, as well as the end result, but also the partnership with the artist itself. It also took an inspiration of spirituality and human connection with the work, and it is far removed from the figurative. But it still does focus on movement through line, color, texture, and etc. So, two prominent figures I wanted to just bring forth, these are both white men, is Jackson Pollock, and he's known for his incredibly large drip paintings, and Mark Rothko, who utilizes texture and color theory to create large scale color fields for reflection and contemplation. So let's get into the gray areas with New York. So, with the civil rights movement picking up, there's momentum around the United States. During the late 1950s, many were seeking change and many were joining a cause. People would find a position, job, or role, or just support the countless folks that were demanding voting rights, indiscrimination, fair job wages, and etc. So, a collage and visual artist from the Harlem Renaissance named Romare Bearden had asked the question, what is the Negro artist on social issues? He and another Harlem Renaissance artist, Hale Woodruff, would have these discussions and include other Black artists. Thus, the group Spiral was born in Harlem, New York. Hale Woodruff suggested they use the word spiral because a spiral moves outward, embracing all directions yet continually upward. The artists included in Spiral, outside of Bearden and Woodruff, would be Charles Austin, Calvin Douglas, Perry Ferguson, Reginald Gammon, Felrath Hines, Alvin Hollingsworth, Norman Lewis, William Majors, Richard Mayhew, Earl Miller, Martin Simpson, James Wergan, and the only Black woman, Emma Amos. Bearden had desired for the group to work collaboratively in a collage style, which he was working in, but that was not agreed upon. They did agree upon using black and white for the palette. And there's a statement from their exhibition for their only show, and this is what it said. Now, after nearly 2 years of having been together, we have decided for our first public exhibition to use only black and white. This consideration of limitation was conceived from technical terms, although deeper motivations may have been involved, such as the use of black and white at this time could be a contrast to what we're literally seeing as it parallels what has been the pathology of the United States, and gray color symbolizes integration. It was this investigation where there was a specific aesthetic, a Negro art. Again, they only had one exhibit and they would disband afterwards. One of my favorite pieces in this, and I absolutely love, and this is what actually introduced me to abstract art, is this by Norman Lewis called The Processional, emphasizing the length of the canvas by using a smaller or not a wide horizontal space. We see some broad strokes of white with negative space or the black in between until we reach the very right end of the canvas and the right strokes are heavily overlapping. Lewis was highlighting the movement of the people in the March on Washington. By focusing on the lower portions of their bodies, he's capturing not only the movement of the people, but even the number of people that marched. And moving from more abstract to more figurative, we have a style is by Reginald Gammon. Like Lewis, he's expressed movement at the top of his work with the marching of feet. He also creates a unique composition by painting an array of faces stacked upon each other and use variations of gray, possibly to depict different ethnic backgrounds and races. Furthermore, like Lewis, he is emphasizing with the overlapping of faces to create the vast number of people that participated in the walk. And just in juxtaposition, we have a photograph from the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom in 1963. Another group that was founded in 1963 is the Koimoinge Workshop. That is a collective of two existing photography groups in Harlem, New York. The first group was known as Group 35, included James Ray Francis, Earl James, Louis Draper, Herman Howard, Calvin Wilson, and Calvin Mercer. The second group of photographers, although they didn't have a name and they were loosely coming together, Albert Fenner, James Maness, Herbert Randall, and Sean Walker. That same year, Herb Robertson, David Carter, Adria Cohens, and Anthony Barboza would join. In 1965, Buford Smith, and then Ming Smith, the only female member at that time, joined in 1972. The word Koimoinge comes from the Kikuyu language of the Kikuyu people who are part of the larger Bantu people in Central East Africa, and it literally it translates to loosely a group of people who work together. The purpose was to challenge the stereotype and caricature of how Black people were portrayed. They would capture, preserve, and document the breadth and narratives of life across the African diaspora, showcasing integrity, dignity, beauty, and pride. So I do want to mention that throughout the workshop, they would work individually. They would have group discussions of styles and also be each other motivators. They would not only promote and nurture each other, but challenge one another when it comes to their work. A beautiful example of this is this image by Adria Cohens, and it's Malcolm Speaks from 1965. It's an aerial photograph of Malcolm X speaking in Harlem. There was an audio interview from the Working Together, the Photographers of Koimoinge Workshop exhibition, where he discusses how he went on the rooftop to capture the shot. He wanted to capture the amount of people that were there, present, listening to Malcolm. He said that oftentimes the news would mention stating that, oh, Malcolm is speaking, he's starting trouble, but it never showed how mass the audience was. It's also important to mention that by the late 60s, early 70s, many Black artists were traveling over to Africa and making connection with African artists as well as the content. A perfect example is Ming Smith Onlookers from Isle de Gorée de Senegal. And she shot this beautiful photograph of these adorable young boys. This candid photo captures what is contradictory of what the image has been created around Africa from the Western lens for centuries. Here we just see young boys observing something in the distance, happy, healthy, existing, and living. It also provides the opportunity for Ming as a Black American to experience the motherland for herself. It's nation time as we head to Chicago. So as we head to Chicago, we're going to be on the south side of Chicago, where at one point there were writers, poets, and visual artists were creating works and responses during the civil rights movement. Thus formed the Organization of Black American Culture, or ABASI, and it grew out of the Committee for the Arts. Founded by Hoyt Fuller, he and the likes of Gerald McWhorter, who's later known as Abdul Akelema, and Conrad Kent Rivers would have discussions similar to what everyone else is doing in the country and ideas on work and the creative contribution. Artist Jeff Donaldson, who came up with the name Obasi, derives from the Yoruba word Oba, which translates to leadership or to lead. They would also have a formal staff, bylaws, and multiple workshops, a writer's workshop with artists such as Nikki Giovanni and Sonia Sanchez, drama, and visual art. So, the Wall of Respect in 1967 would be one of Abasi's greatest contribution. This was a collaboration of 14 artists, designers, and photographers, specifically muralist, African American muralist William Walker, and it was designed by Lainey Sylvia Abernathy. The mural was located on a condemned building on 43rd and Langley Avenue. It was determined that it would capture and celebrate Black heroes, and it had 7 categories: rhythm and blues, jazz, theater, statesman, could be read as politics, religion, literature, and sports. They would create this exasperated list of inspirational individuals. Now, to be honest, there would be some controversy with some of these nominees based on the choices in their personal lives versus their professional lives and the work that they were doing for the community. And artists such as Jeff Donaldson, Wadsworth Jarrell, Barbara Jones Hugo, and Karen Lawrence, and photographers Robert Bobby, Sinstack, and Daryl Cowart would be some of the artists that collaborated. The mural was actually completed on August 24th, in 1967, and the dedication ceremony was on the 27th of August. The community was invited to attend as celebration. There was live music, poetry readings performed by Gwendolyn Brooks and Don Lee as well. In the book Walls of Heritage, Walls of Pride, it's a book on African American murals. Authors James Brigoff and Robin J. Dunitz reveals it is considered the first large scale outdoor community mural, which spawned a movement across the United States and internationally. By 1975, over 200 murals would appear throughout Black neighborhoods. Although Abasi disbanded, several artists would go on to create another Black collective that would become what many have called the art of the Black nationalist, Black power, Black is beautiful movement. AfriCoba, founded in 1968, although conversations began in 1962, Jeff Donaldson, Barbara Jones Hugo, Wadsworth Jarrell, Jay Jarrell, and Gerald Williams, again, some of these artists were on a wall of respect, begin to ask the question if there is a specific aesthetic to Black art, and is it possible to create a collective artist that works with those themes and aesthetic? Originally in the early 60s called Cobra, the Commune of Black Revolutionary Artists, they would add Afri for Africa to highlight that this was in fact the African diaspora. Eventually, they renamed it AfriCobra, the African Commune of Bad Relevant Artists. In addition to Donaldson, Jones, Hugo, Williams, and the Jarrells, others members include Napoleon Henderson, Nelson Stevens, Sherman Beck, Omar Lana, Karen Lawrence, and Howard Mallory Jr. So, nation time and is important because it impacts and helps establish the AfriCobra Manifesto. In nation time, we are now searching. Our guidelines are our people, the whole family of the African people, the African family tree. And in the spirit of familyhood, we have carefully examined our roots and searched for our branches for the visual qualities that are expressive of our people and art. Nation Time was actually a poem that was created by Amira Baraka, and it is a call to the action of Black people to collectively rise and work together as one nation. I encourage you to go to YouTube and listen to it because it's backed by a blend of improvisation of jazz, funk, free jazz, and also to emphasize the use of his repetition, his onomatopoeia, and his stagnation and stanzas in the poem. AfriCobra actually had three categories that they would explore. Definition, that would be the image that deals with the past. Identification, images that relate to the present. And direction, images that look to the future. In addition to these three categories, they came up with this idea of exploring these aesthetics of what it is to be unapologetically Black in art. Expressive awesomeness, symmetry of free. So they really wanted to invoke the free movements that often exist in the African culture and the diaspora, feeling forms that evoke, shine, brilliance that takes up space, color, also referred to as Kool-Aid colors, and the importance of use of language and text. Ultimately, AfriCobra was about making art not only by the people, about the people, but accessible and relatable to the people. Art was not about being an intellect. It was about the feeling and emotion. Art was not for the critic, it was for the people. And a perfect example is Omar Lama's work. Lana work went directly to the source by creating these beautiful renderings of an African mask and the Akuaba figure, which is a fertility figure. So he just went directly like, I'm just going to pull from our ancestry. But the use of line is absolutely incredible. Jay Jarrell, she's a clothing designer and artist, wore her art and proves that fashion is art. The revolutionary suit from 1968 evokes so much of it. The bright yellow suede bandolier is what really sets it off against that gray. And the bandolier usually holds like the bullets for rifles. And many members of the Black Panthers, specifically Dr. Huey P. Newton, always wore them against his leather jacket as well as his beret. Another artist, Barbara Jones Hugos, created Unite with bold colors with the repetition of Unite. When we repeat things, we tend to remember those. So seeing that Unite in those bold colors also is helping us to remember that notion to unite. In addition, with the raised fist of the hair, you see the ankh earrings, the wide nose, the full lips, the unapologetic blackness of our features with the raised fist is also that solidarity that comes in as well. Jeff Donaldson actually brings in the spirituality of Yoruba from West Africa, of the divine spirits of the Orishas. The Orishas act as guides and aids within the Yoruba spirituality. Shango is the Orisha of thunder and fire and lightning and justice, and he has three wives. On the left, we have Oya. She's the Orisha of thunder, storms, wind, and justice. In the center is Oba. She's the Orisha of the river. And in the right is Oshun. She is the Orisha of fertility, beauty, sweet waters, and love. By any means. So let's head to Watts, Los Angeles. So on the West Coast, Black arts movement was developing there. Artists such as Melvin Edwards was a huge impact. He was a metal sculptor, but he also worked in drawing and printmaking, whose work often blended politics and African American history, particularly around the era of American slavery. Here we see images from his lynch fragments. So, and these are inspired by things that have happened. So, in 1962, an unarmed member of the Nation of Islam, Roland Stokes, was shot by a police officer inside a mosque. Malcolm X would come to speak. That same year, Ralph Ginsberg, who's an author, wrote a book, 100 Years of Lynching, which chronicles narratives and stories of how lynching impacted everyone. So it's views from both Black and white folks in his writings too. And here we see Melvin on the left with one of his pieces entitled Lynch Fragments, and he continued to make these beautiful pieces as well. Another example of metalworking, creating almost like a totem or altarpiece. This was included his first solo show, and that was 1 month after Malcolm X assassinated, and that is the piece, The Lifted X. There's something I want to mention because this definitely impacts the Black arts movement. So, some 6 days after the Civil Rights Act of 1965, the Voting Rights Act was signed, tension had already been long simmering in Los Angeles, California, particularly the Watts area, and it was about to explode. Stepbrothers Marquette and Ronald Fry were pulled over by a white state patroller in the Watts neighborhood. Marquette failed a sobriety test and feared being arrested. So him and his patroller are going back and forth and eventually gets into a scuffle. Now his brother, Ronald, also is trying to protect him so nothing else can happen to him because they already know the conditioning of white policing in the community. Soon a crowd would start to amass. Of course, the white patroller calls for backup, and an excessive amount of white officers show up. And they were informed before they got there that the Black crowd was aggressive and excessive. At one point, the officers dragged a Black woman through the crowd because someone had spit on one of the officers. They didn't know who actually spit, so they grabbed her. Within 45 minutes of these two young men being pulled over, a full riot broke out. These riots and protests lasted for about 6 days. There were 34 deaths, thousands arrested, and it cost the city about $40 million. Post the Watts riots, artist Noah Purifoy collected some of the debris and trash and remains from the aftermath of the Watts riot to create these abstract pieces, assemblages, and found objects for the Watts. What this does, it introduces abstract art to the community. It makes it accessible. More importantly, it shows how disorder can give birth to beautiful things. These discarded debris became like a reliquary of the pending revolution that Black folks had been yearning for, and also the tension and the stress they've had enough of. So let's talk about Brother Emory Douglas. He joined the Black Panthers in 1967, graduated from San Francisco City College with graphic design degree. Douglas would also be alongside the Minister of Information with Eldridge Cleaver. At that time, Eldridge Cleaver had a very extremely I hate to say militant, but it was image of the Black Panthers. So there's a very famous photo of Dr. Huey P. Newton. He is sitting in a that wicker chair. He has the gun in his hand. So that kind of motif was some of the imagery that was coming out. However, it with Douglass that would expand and sort of shift the image as well. And there's an example of one too. We see its bold lines and simple palette. And Douglass will go ahead and create images of Leroy Jones, who's Amiri Baraka, Stokely Carmichael, known as Kwame Ture, and H. Rap Brown, because they were the archetypes of the revolution. He also often used mother and children to humanize the Black community and also to remind Black men what they're here to protect. The style emphasized was with limited colors but bold lines, and in some cases, he would even combine photographic image and hand drawn images. And Douglass specifically chose posters, although they would also be printed in a newspaper, to make the work accessible to the people. So by putting posters in laundromats, barbershops, salons, grocery stores, spaces where Black people convene, not only were they getting educated, they were also being able to experience art. So we want a revolution. So throughout the Black arts movement, Black women artists were creating works in predominantly a white male field and also in Black collectives that often exhibit the Black men. So there was a need for Black women's voices to be heard. Thus came the collective founded in 1970 fund, Where We At. Artists such as Dinga McCannon, Kay Brown, Faith Ringo, Carol Blank, Gerald Crooks, Charlotte Cobb Richardson, and Gilbert Coker were some of these women artists. The organization did more than just make art and exhibit. They would also foster and build community by providing art classes, mentorships, and workshops in schools, hospitals, and prisons. So Dinga McCannon, this is an example of two of her works. And on the left, we have the Revolutionary Sister. It's a vibrant piece of work, but I love her position with her hand standing on her hip with a slightly contra pose. That try me if you want to. The vibrant colors, her afro adorned with a crown, makes her present hard to ignore. She is standing firm, and you have to acknowledge her. The next piece, Slave Shackles and Prods, is a wood block print that captures the horrors of slavery, but also um, it gives another message to me. All of these enslaved people are chained and they outnumber the slave trader who is occupying the full left portion of the print from top to bottom. If you notice in his hand, there is a prod with lines indicating its importance of pain and power. It can also be a reminder that no one will have that power over us again. We have the tools for liberation. Another impactful artist, a women artist, is Betty Saar, who has been creating mixed media pieces, assemblages, and works for years. Not only are they revolutionary, but they're also an internal spiritual revolution. This shadow box of the liberation of Aunt Jemima is one of my favorite pieces. And as you see, she uses the advertisement of Aunt Jemima in the background. At the center figure, she has an Aunt Jemima, kind of like a mini sculpture. It might have been a cookie jar of something, just decorative art. And at the center of Aunt Jemima is a notepad of Aunt Jemima holding a white baby. You see, she has on that connet red and white handkerchief. One hand, she has the broom, and the other, she has the shotgun. Also, if you look closely, but where her arm is, that has the broom, between her and the broom, there is this metal piece right there. That is the pin of a grenade. So this is the liberation of her. And just to give a background of it, when pearl milling companies began selling their ready to make pancake mix in the 1880s, they actually used and copied a heavy set Black woman off a vaudeville poster or the minstrel shows, creating the notion of the mammy figure in slavery. Because remember, mammy was the happy, heavy set, jolly Black woman that took care of the family and kids and adored those children. Pearl Milling Company began to lose money and they would sell the company to R.T. Davis Milling Company in 1890. That company would hire a formerly enslaved woman named Nancy Green to pose as Aunt Jemima at the World Columbian Expo in Chicago in 1893. There, she would sing songs of the Old South, the good old days, the visitors, the good old days to visitors, again, advertising and creating corporate branding. Side note, Aunt Jemima is also part of a lawsuit that allows for that deals with infringement and copyright and trademark protections. But that's another story to go into. And the company would have, throughout its time between 1893 to 1965, 10 Black women act as quote unquote brand ambassadors of Aunt Jemima. Nancy Green, Agnes Moody, Lillian Richard, Artie Bell McGinty, and she actually debuts as Aunt Jemima radio voice. Anna Robinson, Rose Washington Riles, Anna Short Harrington, Edith Wilson, Ethel Ernestine Harper, Rosie Lee Hall, and Eileen Lewis would be Black women that would portray a real life Aunt Jemima. Visual artist, educator, and organizer Faith Ringrose created a series of works called American People. This final piece of American People series was created during one of the most tumultuous times of the civil rights movement in the 1960s. She created this post assassination of Malcolm X and completed it right before the assassination of Dr. King. If you look in the image, this is also inspired by Picasso's Guernica, which was about what was happening over there between, I believe, it was just the people being harmed by the politics and the government at that point. If you look at it, it's kind of the same way. There's only two people that have weapons, and that's in the upper right hand corner. We see a white man with the gun and a Black man with the knife. Yet, what we do see is the horrors, the children clinging to a Black and white child, clinging to each other, a Black man carrying a white, catching a white man, and we just see blood. And again, it's talking about how, in proximity to this racism, everyone suffered. It was Ringo's testimony, in a sense, of the direction that America has been. Some of the art during this time is extremely graphic and extremely emotional because of the connections it has with real living people that were fighting for liberation and just Black people to have rights in their humanity. David Hammons is a multidisciplinary artist that used mixed media, installation, and performance in a combination in his work. From the late 60s to the late 70s, Hammons begins to create these body prints. He would apply Crisco or margin substance all over his body and lay on the paper. Then he would use pigments and apply that to where the body print was so that image would be revealed. My favorite piece by him of his body prints, and probably one of his more well known, is the Injustice case, where Hammons is gagged and bound to the chair and placed on the American flag. This was inspired by the inhumane treatment of Bobby Seale, who was gagged and bound in a trial in 1969, which was the trial of Chicago 8. Seale had lashed out at the judge, and the judge had him gagged and bound. On the left, because there were no photographs, is a court drawing rendering by Howard Brody of Seale being gagged and bound to his chairs as he's trying to take notes. Another artist is Dana Chandler Jr., whose work appeared up Fred Hampton's door, would actually appear on Time magazine. His work illustrates the attack and assassination of Fred Hampton on December 4th, 1969. Around 4:45 a.m., Fred Hampton was assassinated in his sleep, as well as others in his home, after the Chicago police raided it. On December 3rd, 1969, Hampton and several other Panthers and supporters had came from teaching the session. William O'Neill, the infiltrator of the Black Panther Party Chicago and FBI informant, had slipped a Seco Barbiturate in his drink, and at 4 o'clock, the police came to his home in Maywood. There were 8 officers at the front, 6 at the back. At 4:45, they went in and opened fire, killing several people, including Hampton. Although some works show the horrors of the revolution, there was also a spiritual side, and one artist that captures that is Senga Ngugi, and this is her performance, photography, mixed media, multidisciplinary work, Ceremony for Freeway Fats. This was bringing in the performance of dance, music, and visual art. Ngugi and the Collective Z, which was a loose art collective of musicians, artists that include David Hammons and Marion Hassinger, created a public piece under the freeway. At this time, freeway constructions were heavy and they were kind of encroaching on many communities. If you ever want to know where Black communities once existed, before, like the 50s, 60s, and 70s, look at where freeways intersect and connect. I guarantee you a Black community was there. I can give a perfect example here in Cincinnati, the West End. However, but through this multidisciplinary work, she is invoking community. She's also honoring African community with spirituality performance, because you just didn't sit and observe when it came to your community, especially in spiritual practice and celebration. You were actively a part of it. And again, it's that connection of being participatory and being both human and of spirit. So, the recap: Black arts movement allowed artists to explore not only a breadth of Blackness, but the humanity of our Blackness across the diaspora. Black artists would move beyond the tradition of paper and canvas to mixed media assemblages, found objects, photography, installation, and public art. They created visual language, aesthetics, and ideals that were inspired by their own Blackness. And these artists carved out and took up spaces that made art accessible to communities. It reflected the community as a work of art itself. That has been Y'all Late to the Revolution. I hope you all enjoy. Stay tuned for the next unit, which will be which will be called What They Say We Ain't. And this will look at Black folks as popes, the Madonnas, and royalty as martyr and religious figures in art. Thank you all so much, and you all have a blessed day.